Thank you for being here and for watching this stream and video. I'll be making an update on the digital integrity of the human person, and this is the 2023 view before we start in 2024. I could have called this talk as with an alternative title on how I made 94% of the people in Geneva vote yes on a digital right, which is, I think, something pretty new. And I'll explain what's the state of this and how we achieved that. So quickly, who I am. I'm Alexis Roussel. I'm a pirate. I'm a CEO of Name Technologies, working on privacy, software, and network. And also, I consider myself as a legal hacker. So what we were trying to do is, as a group, we are trying to find a core digital human right, something that would give an instruction to the society on how we should be treated and how we should view our digital lives. And the specific of this digital human right is that it needs to be understood and enforced by everyone in a easy and clear way. The same as some core fundamental rights are being understood and enforced. Of course, it's not the case with all human rights, but let's say that let's talk about the core ones. So the concept is pretty simple, is that in traditional human rights, you have a right which is really rarely used in the discourse because we consider it as achieved, is that we have a right to physical and mental integrity. So here the concept is just to add a digital part of it. So next to the physical and mental integrity, we also have the digital integrity of the human person. What it means is, what the physical and mental integrity means is that by respecting the integrity of a person, we can guarantee his autonomy and its freedom. So a person is as free as it is protected from the society from any harm on his physical and mental integrity. So I thought a few years ago that we could just add digital so that we should also apply this guarantee in the digital dimension. So why did I think of this? I was pretty much influenced by a lot of people, and this is one example of a person who did influence me is Peter Sunde, when he was in his trial on the Pirate Bay, during the Pirate Bay trial, and the judge wanted to make a point, oh, you were meeting people in real life, IRL, and Peter Sunde said, no, we don't use the expression IRL, we say AFK, which means away from keyboard, because we think the internet is for real. There's no difference between when I'm online and when I'm not online. It's the same thing. And for the judge, there was something different. So there was like a clash, like a gap between an old generation and a new generation. The other thing that felt always wrong for me is that when you hear mainstream people in power, ministers in charge of business, in charge of digital industry, they always say personal data is the oil of the 21st century. And they build up a whole industry in the US, in Europe, in Asia around this concept. And I feel that's wrong, and basically you have a lot of work that was being done, and the term surveillance capitalism was coined also. That is actually starting from the point of personal data is oil, that you can generate value out of it, and so you can create a whole data economy around this. And now I think we're in a state where we have identified this really well, but there is currently no challenge to that system. So I wrote a book, like an essay, which is called Our Precious Digital Integrity, integrity in French only right now. Hopefully one day it will be in English, which kind of like goes around this concept of digital integrity and how it is made and what are some of the consequences. So it builds up on something that was already in preparation or being actually implemented in the European legal system. It is a right to digital self-determination. And I put it in German because it was actually coined by the German High Court, the Recht auf informationelle Selbstbestimmung. So this is a right which actually tries to view the digital world through the eyes of through the lens of keeping the person autonomous. So it's a start, but my main critic of this is twofold. One, it's only in jurisprudence, so it's like an interpretation of the existing law, and it doesn't change really the law. And the second is that it's not explicitly written. It's not something, and the second thing, it's not explicitly written, but it's also not understandable by common people. If you go in the street and say, hey, you have a right to digital self-determination, people will be like, I don't know. So it is a right which is not obviously expressed in constitutions, and I think it needed to be present somehow. So my point with the right to digital integrity is the same as physical integrity, is that if the right to physical integrity is the right that is protecting your autonomy, your self-determination in the physical world, well, actually your protecting your digital integrity is what will guarantee your right to digital self-determination in the society. So actually the two are linked together, but you don't need to express the first one, you just need to express the second one, but which is much more adequate in the legal system. So we worked on a legal publication in 2020 also, done by the University of Neuchâtel in Switzerland, where all teachers from professors from different law studies, criminal law, civil law, international private law, and went and tried to think about this term. So the construct is really simple. And sometimes it's because it's so simple that lawyers themselves, they're like, that's not possible to do, it's too simple. But if you read the important documents, like the Charter of Fundamental Rights, constitutions of certain countries, you will see that there's always a pattern when it comes to fundamental rights. And one of the patterns that you see is that there is a right to life, then there's a right to dignity, and then there's a right to integrity. And then after only you have specific rights. So today, when we talk about privacy, privacy is actually set at a level in this construct, which is in the category of specific rights. Privacy is a tool that will help you to be more free, right? But are the same as freedom of speech, freedom of movement, or freedom of business, these are specific rights. And right now, all our efforts to protect the digital space is done through this specific right of privacy, but actually I think it's limited because it just tries to cover the privacy and not other things that are also digital. So we need to make it more obvious and make it more wider. And so move one step up actually to the integrity. So I'll give you some example of possible implementation. So like here we have two. So this is the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, and there's an Article 3, that says everyone has a right to respect for his or her physical and mental integrity. And then the Swiss Constitution has a very similar article which says every person has the right to personal liberty and in particular to physical and mental integrity and the freedom of movement. All right, so the idea is really just to add digital here and to widen the scope suddenly of, oh, the person has a physical, mental, but also digital presence that the society needs to respect. So based on this, there was a first implementation which has been put in the Constitution in Geneva. And this was pretty interesting because on the 18th of June of 2023, so this year, after somehow two years of work by some parliamentarians and by the cantonal administration, the text was submitted to the people, and 94% people voted yes. There was like very little debate. There was like full consensus, and the text was basically: do you want a higher protection in the digital space? Do you want your digital integrity to be safeguarded? And people said yes. So the text is a little bit more complex than this, but the result is very striking. So we have a legal tool where suddenly people say, well, this is what I want. And one of the main critics that was from the other texts, like when you look at GDPR and a lot of texts which are around digital topics, they are extremely complex. They are really done by technicians and no one understands them. So here it was a simple text with no technical terms, and suddenly people understood and voted yes. There are other implementation which are underway, mainly in Switzerland. The canton of Valais actually has it already approved in its draft of constitution, because they are changing the constitution, and this constitution will be voted in 2024. So normally that's one of the things that will happen in 2024. It will be added into the Valais constitution, so we'll have a second one. We'll see, because there are some other contentious point on this constitution, so we're not sure if people will actually vote for the constitution. Canton of Neuchâtel is in the work of the parliament is working on the text Jura Vaud, and there was a federal parliament initiative proposed, but it was rejected by a vote of a very short vote, like 15 to 13 in commission. And sadly, the debate was not brought the right way, and they thought that it was, some people said, oh no, we first need to see if the current law are useful enough. After 20 years of failure, they said, no, we want to try it a bit more. So we say, okay. So this is the map, a bit of how it goes. You can see this map on Wikipedia. And you can see, so Geneva is in like dark green, and then you see the map growing. Zug has also, the parliament in Zug is working on it, and I didn't put it on this map, but in Zurich now there's an initiative done by the Pirate Party they're starting to collect a signature. So what is interesting also is all the related rights that come with it. So in Neuchâtel was pretty strong in adding some details to give some meat to it. What you had in Valais and in Neuchâtel, we'll see if in Neuchâtel it will be the same way, but right now in Valais the text is the same, is that instead of saying you have a right against abuse about your data, which is what GDPR and traditional law says, it says you have the right to be protected against the non-consensual usage of personal data. This is important because it's one of the things, and as conclusion, I will go back to it, it allows you to change the burden of proof of the whole system. That's the key. You don't have to prove there's an abuse. Is if you feel that there is non-consensual usage of your data, then you can fight for it. The second thing is the right to be forgotten. Is a right which exists already from some time, but in Geneva they have put it inside the article of the right to digital integrity, which gives a certain flavor to it. And it's the first time that the right to be forgotten is actually in the Constitution. They put the right for security in the digital space. What is interesting is they put the digital space as a notion in the Constitution of Geneva, They also, the right for security, I can see this. I'm not sure if they what they were thinking really behind this, but what I feel with this is that we can actually, for example, if the police of a place is using a Trojan horse based on zero-day vulnerabilities, well, actually this is breaking the security for everyone in digital space. So it's actually an infringement to my right that the police should not have 0 days available for them. So maybe that's an option for us to then start challenging them in court like this. The most interesting one is the right to an offline life. This was like the most talked about in Geneva. And really on a very practical thing. So like Swiss politics is really practical, you know, it goes down to like how people react, and you have like the parliaments, they talk about real scenario. And here it's like the old lady goes to the city hall and wants to do admin stuff, and she needs to be guaranteed that she can do with talking to someone or through paper. That's really how they thought about it, and I think for us, it's even if we are extremely geeky, extremely digitized, it forces also to say, well, the way you choose your protocol, the standards you're using, everything needs to respect the fact that you can remain disconnected from the government, and they're not. You cannot have a service which is forced on you. That is dependent on Google services, for example. That was the case with the COVID app, for example. The COVID app, all the COVID apps where you had to use Google services with it. And that was a problem, which I think was a problem. And then the last one is the most controversial one. And I hope I'm pushing this in the debate. It's even in Switzerland, it's going to be a bit hard, but if you really go to the bottom of what the right to digital integrity is, and you want to protect and to make sure people have an offline life and really protect the person, actually you need to impose also to the state a right not to be surveilled, like forcing not to measure, not to analyze, not to get any data. They need to remove all the metadata anytime they have interactions with the citizens. And ideally have a zero knowledge society, basically, where they can provide, we can provide together road infrastructure, school infrastructure, but where everyone remains anonymous. So that's a bit the ideal. But right now, this is important because they are not. Most of the administration some of them do surveillance by themselves, but most of them are actually using tools which comes with surveillance, right? And they don't even are aware that they are imposing surveillance by using, I don't know, Microsoft Teams in schools, for example. That's an example. So this one came out. It was like some parliamentarians push this, and I took it, and I think we should push it further. But now we have a legal logic on how to impose the right to anonymity, which through the right to digital integrity. So the consequences is that the first like major consequence, which is like almost philosophical, is that we can have a definition of what personal data is. That was not my invention. It was like some actually people from data protection agencies in France and in other French-speaking countries. They went together. They made a declaration, and they said that personal data are elements of the person. So and because they're element of the person, they cannot be sold. So the government should not make a market. And this is important because on the geopolitical space, you have in the US, let's say the US zone, personal data is a commodity, something you can buy, sell, you can augment. In Asia, in the Chinese and Russian sphere, data is a public good where that you can of course harvest, but at the end it's the government who is in charge of it and has to be used for the benefit of the society, whatever it is. So the Chinese would have the national happiness, whatever. So and if you infringe on one specific person, it doesn't really matter because the goal is larger than this. So that's one very interesting element. which will have geopolitical implication, I hope, if a whole region or a country really moves into there, then basically it will push a system where people are anonymized rather than systems like in the US or in China where it's part of the system to actually extract data. You need data to make the system work. So you can think that basically just harvesting data, just like collecting data on someone, is actually harming his own digital integrity. So this is something that can be that you can easily convey. And so what it does at the end, and this will hopefully we'll see this in front of tribunals, is that it changes the burden of proof. So right now, the only successful story we have is basically Max Schrems, who made incredible work going against Facebook and some other institutions. But he had to spend like all his time and all his legal knowledge and effort to make a point and say, well, you don't treat my data as you should be treating. And here the idea is to not force people to have these systems, because it's impossible for a random person to be Max Schrems himself. We are not all Max Schrems, right? So if someone is a victim, feels the consequences of a bad treatment of data, just by this, he needs to be able to challenge the authority and not have to discover and explain how bad the treatment of data was done, right? That's not his job. You don't have to prove how bad it was. You just have to show the consequences. And the judge, if it touches your autonomy, if it touches your individuality, then the judge would have to protect you. Yeah, it's also about like breaking the nothing to hide logic, because at the end, what I propose is that we go out of just the privacy angle, and that has been a bit our issue for many years, is that privacy is we put a lot of things, we reinterpret privacy to put a lot of things inside, but actually privacy is just one piece of the puzzle. And what we're really talking about is just digital people and digital society, and how we make our own decisions in that society. So it's not just about privacy. So when you say we have nothing to hide, well, the person only understands digital world through the privacy angle. And we need to break away from this. But people do actually understand it. Yeah, so some people will ask, why do we need a right to digital integrity in the Constitution? Well, actually, it's exactly the place, if we accept, and this is the baseline, is that we still accept that there's a nation state with Constitution. Maybe in a future state or a future society, we might see things differently, but this is working with the existing system, and the Constitution have been built exactly for this to state rights on how the state should behave with the individuals, and so we're putting at the same place this concept of digital integrity. Well, what I hope it would do is that once it's there, and we see this in Geneva already happening, it will incentivize the state and the government to actually provide the tools for people to start building up their protection and even to defend their digital autonomy. And the end game is that actually it gives for a state, it gives the option to opt out of surveillance capitalism. So that's the once you have a school which whenever they're going to choose the next software, Microsoft or whoever big one will come, oh, we'll give you this software for free, but they will have to say, well, it doesn't protect the people's autonomy because you're collecting all this data. They will counteract and say, yeah, but we protect privacy. Yeah, but that's not enough. You need more. And that's impossible for them to do because the whole business is made out of profiling people and collecting data in a way that it doesn't infringe privacy. They will always find a way to protect privacy, but it does infringe your autonomy. So governments can have a prospective influence on the private sector in the long run. So what I propose is that the right to digital integrity is a general justification to right to data protection. I think that's how we can see it. Like I said, the further work on this is geopolitical data. I touched about it with the three big region, and I think also the fact of choosing a path where a government is protecting the integrity, digital integrity of people, is the cheaper way. Is the way of not surveilling, not building a lot of infrastructure, hiding its people, and then if you are trying to build the same level of machinery to surveil all your people, it costs a lot of money. So what people do is usually they just like buy it from the US or from China, right? So it just takes more money out. So actually what you can imagine is that a country that really enforces true anonymity to its own people will actually save a lot of money and will allow these people to actually also use tools where they keep more value within themselves. So the right of anonymity will be one of the strong points, and we will see, hopefully it will be the contentious point that will push us into the digital society. Of course, there's like work on digital sovereignty also. Digital sovereignty is a really weird term that is right now completely misunderstood because people think about data centers in one country. You know, we are sovereign because data is here. But it's not just about this, it's about people also, and I think this will bring this debate. There's a Wikipedia article in English, in French. No, now the English is there, sorry, I forgot to update. So there's a French, there's a German, and there's a Spanish version of it also. Please go there. All the data is there, and you can update if you see things which are missing. And then there's already some research that has been done from the university in Czech Republic. It's called Digital Integrity as a New Foundation for Digital Rights and a New Manifestation of Human Dignity. What is really interesting about this research work is that it is it makes a critic of GDPR through the angle of digital integrity, saying basically that the GDPR is failing in one big thing, even though it is that it just tries to maintain the market. Right? It's a market tool. So it goes from the assumption that there's a market, there's a data market. And then it tries to push more responsibility to the guy who's managing the data to protect more of the people. But in the end, the market is still there. And what I propose is simply that we just destroy the market. Thank you.